The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guest or host are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Hello and welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Herkel. This show is all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. We are going to feature some very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to lead their best lives naturally. And hello, everyone. Welcome back to Supplementing Health. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Herkel. I'm back with a previous guest of ours, Todd Frankovic, and we're going to talk about all the things we didn't get a chance to talk about in our previous show. We're talking about what's inside of your supplements. So we're not talking about particular ingredients and nutrients about some of their health benefits. We're going to actually talk about purity, stability, a lot of the questions that people have around the natural health products that they're taking. Are they effective? What else is in my supplement? Is there something in terms of heavy metals, lead, pesticides, fungus, mold? All these are questions that sometimes people ask at different times. I know that when I do a lot of trainings and education with my colleagues and with health food stores around North America, people are always asking about some of these extra things that go into supplements. And all these things play a key role in terms of determining the health impact and actually if the natural health product that you're taking is effective. So, Todd, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
For those of you that missed the previous show, Todd, can you just give us a quick little spiel about who you are and how you are one of the experts in this area?
Sure. My name is Todd. I've been in the industry for almost a decade. That's the dietary supplement natural health product industry. I got my start in raw material manufacturing, specifically botanical extracts. Eventually moved my way into developing products for the North American market. My specialties have really been botanical extracts, whole foods, greens, and now starting to move more into vitamins and minerals.
Awesome. So you're the perfect guy to be talking about this particular topic. So let's start where we ended off and just quickly pull together. We'll start with this. How do you know that the supplement that you're taking is high quality? What should you be looking for right off the bat?
That's a very good question where a lot of the things that go into the quality of a supplement or a natural health product isn't actually labeled. And that really comes down to the sourcing of the material, where it's coming from, what kind of certifications those raw materials have. How do you know that it's not contaminated, whether it be with toxins or synthetics that aren't studied, or even spiked with ingredients that aren't on the label? So it's a matter of I feel like it's a matter of trusting the brands that you buy from and aligning yourself with the views of the companies that you're buying natural health products from.
Right. Ultimately, it comes down to some trust. Like, for example, if I'm going to go to the local supermarket and it says it's organic celery, like most people take that at face value, right? But for the consumer that's like, I don't know if I want to trust supplements. For example, there was a recent supplement that was used for sleep that was recalled because there was an ingredient inside of that product that was not disclosed in the label, and that was very similar to a class of sleeping medications. So I think there's this kind of a little bit of skepticism. Obviously, on the medical side, conventionally, there's always this skepticism to one degree or another, but even regular consumers, do you just trust the based what's on the label? Is there anything else that we can tell a little bit about what goes into it that ensures that those things with a good quality company aren't happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's very disheartening when you see a brand be outed for, adding in an ingredient that wasn't on the label that isn't allowed to make their product work better, uh, without really considering what kind of safety concerns that can cause. And that's a whole hit for the industry, and it's a matter of us as an industry have to get rid of those players because we want to be taken seriously. We want to be providing efficacious and safe products. And so I what really you have to, there are so many different contaminants that you can find in products that you really have to trust the product that you're buying. I think an example that I can give is even a behind the scenes kind of look at an ingredient that a lot of people don't know, and a popular one called rhodiola. So about 2 years ago, the demand for rhodiola has forever been increasing over the past few decades, even. But 2 years ago, it kind of hit a critical mass where a lot of the rhodiola is native to China, and it all of it that was being harvested was wild crafted, which means it wasn't being cultivated or farmed. It was native to China and it was being harvested. And so a lot of companies were in China and they were harvesting this rhodiola. And because the demand kept increasing and increasing, eventually the rhodiola was starting to go extinct within China, and it was disappearing. And so finally, the government decided to enact an environmental. Basically, they put in new rules that you could no longer harvest rhodiola from the wild, and because of that, finally, rhodiola is not extinct in China and it's starting to recover. But ever since that happened, what ended up happening? Rhodiola started coming into the market that was adulterated with different species of rhodiola. So
Right.
instead of using rhodiola rosea, which is the most clinically studied rhodiola, there was rhodiola crenulata coming into the market, and with different actives inside of it that were no longer being equivalent to the clinical studies that were showing up. There was illegal harvesting
Right.
happening within China. There were so many practices that were happening within rhodiola that you didn't know what was in the products that you were taking. And so, you know, the country that you're buying the raw materials from really are important. So an
Right.
example being that now rhodiola, there's a big supply coming out of Serbia, and and that supply in particular has a bunch of sustainability practices that they implement. And sure, yes, it is more expensive to harvest, but at the end of the day, rhodiola is not going extinct there. Rhodiola is thriving, and we're just benefiting from a natural source of rhodiola that continues to come back every year. So, in
But
short,
this is
this product,
farm rhodiola,
yeah,
right? This is not necessarily wild crafted.
yeah. So, the material coming out of Serbia is wild crafted, so you're still getting
Okay.
the actives that you know. There's a benefit to wild crafted materials as you're not depleting the land of its resources.
Hmm.
The actives inside of the product are high because over years of farming, if it's not done right, the actives can start being depleted because the soil is not as rich anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the material from Serbia is actually still wild crafted, but it's done in a sustainable way. That 10 years from now, Serbia is going to be with zero rhodiola, like how China almost got to. while in China now, they implemented a lot of new cultivation.
Right.
And so material coming from China, for the most part, is now cultivated, while there are still a few places throughout the world that can produce wild-crafted rhodiola with minimal environmental impact.
So maybe the part of that is like there's a lot of semantics. Like the first time I was introduced, the semantics was all natural, like which ultimately means nothing in the food space. And then things were coming out to say they were organic, non-GMO, and ultimately I think this wild crafted. Let's speak to just some of the differences in semantics that often people just take for granted. I see wild and they say right away, oh yeah, 100% it has to be better, but they don't realize the impact of it if it truly is wild and it's picked, it can become depleted, like this great example you gave with rhodiola.
Yeah, and even food for thought, our industry calls these products natural health products, even though we can use synthetics. So that's how little the word
Yeah.
natural really means. But you see products all throughout North America claiming natural, even though you see ingredients in there that are obviously synthetic. And so I really do wish that Health Canada and the FDA, for that matter, would really regulate the term natural a little bit more, because it kind of degrades the products that are natural, that are getting it from natural sources and are making the strides to use the non-synthetic forms. Things like theanine, where the synthetic is so much cheaper and widely available than natural, and even though uh, you know people have sleeping products on the market that say natural, even though it contains synthetic theanine. So, you know, there are a lot of these different claims that companies are making that I really do wish would be more widely regulated.
And like, as you said, the word disheartening does come to mind. Confusing because you and I, we're industry insiders. We understand this. I know that there's a synthetic form of theanine, and then there's a natural form from green tea, and customers unfortunately don't know that, and they are taking the labels at face value. So, just because there sometimes is a massive demand, or just because an ingredient is really popular, there is a cause and effect to that. One of the biggest ones, as you said, was rhodiola. The one now that I'm seeing a lot is ashwagandha, which is it's kind of a cousin to rhodiola. It's an Indian ginseng used a lot in Ayurvedic medicine, which uses it for similar things to rhodiola, but it's kind of a general tonic. And there's reports of adulteration coming out on that. Another one that comes to mind is saffron. I don't know if you can speak to a little bit of those two examples, because this is just the nature of cause and effect and supply and demand.
Yeah, exactly. Even with saffron, the country of origin is a big piece of the quality of saffron. There are a lot of sources of saffron right now, specifically coming out of countries like Turkey or Morocco, where it's adulterated, and it's hard to tell because unless you have specific identification testing, it can pass right through. But saffron has been adulterated in those countries with marigold. And so, in order to keep the cost down of the saffron, because saffron is incredibly expensive, they mix in marigold flowers. And so, when we have to source a saffron, you can turn to countries like Iran, where there's no indication of adulteration of saffron with marigold flowers. And this comes back down to testing, right? Where a lot of there are different forms of testing, and when there's adulteration in the form of marigold flowers being in saffron, if you're using specific test methods or testing equipment, uh, you can have a certain amount of marigold in there and it's not detected. And so you have to use the higher end equipment uh, to really find that type of adulteration. And that's what That's what we're doing between our products and our suppliers. We're making sure that there's no adulteration happening. Right now, another example is uh, with synthetics is astaxanthin and curcumin. Both of them, uh, recently, there's been synthetics coming to the market of astaxanthin and curcumin, and they're way less expensive to produce than the natural materials. But the safety data just isn't out on the synthetics.
Yep,
And
that's right.
those synthetics are, we've talked about it before. Those synthetics don't have the entourage effect of the natural ingredients. And so with that, you have to do specific testing that's not required by Health Canada or the FDA in order to figure out if those materials are being spiked with the synthetics. And it's very costly testing, and it's a matter of carbon dating the material to see if it's a synthetic or not, or natural.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's something that we have to do, and it comes from being within this industry for such a long time and getting the experience of knowing the ingredients that could be adulterated. Because at the end of the day, people will companies will try to adulterate products without you noticing. A,
Exactly.
a lot of the brands that are trying to sell products, they may have adulterated materials in their products without even knowing. So you couldn't even blame the brands that are trying to be upstanding.
It's the
But at the
suppliers. It's the ones that are giving them the ingredient, right?
Exactly, and I'm not gonna say that there are particular a country itself is not a problem. It's the companies within those countries. And yes, there may be there may be countries that have more of a concern, like China. But at the same time, there are suppliers out of China that do great jobs. And just like with botanical extraction, China is the most advanced in the world in botanical extraction. And it's a matter of finding the right companies that have the same values as the brands and creating those relationships to know that they're not sending you adulterated or synthetic or ingredients with compositions of unlisted materials. It's a matter of really getting that experience in the partnerships over time to know that you can trust where your material is coming from.
So if you were to summarize everything that you just said, it comes down to the integrity of the company, and you've already talked about it. That's trust, which has to be earned, and unfortunately, sometimes gets eroded by the example of the particular sleep remedy we talked about at the beginning of the episode. But testing and the science and the quantification that goes into it is the real big differentiator. And
Yeah,
companies, the simple way of identifying that is ask, right?
exactly. Some things are very obvious where it doesn't even fall into adulteration, it just comes into the quality. An example being milk thistle, where there's not there's not much milk thistle coming to the market that's questionable, but at the same time, the most commodity based version of milk thistle is extracted using hexane. And so hexane's been linked to different health concerns, but about, I would say, over 90% of what's on the market of milk thistle is extracted using that hexane and has some residual amount of hexane in the product. And so it's a matter of trusting the company and going and trusting that the company that you're buying your product from is going above and beyond and knows things like milk thistle is being extracted elsewhere with hexane, and instead opts for, even though it may be more expensive, but opting for a more clean alternative to hexane as an extractant solvent, like
Right.
ethanol, which is completely safe
Right.
and has been used in extractions
For hundreds of
for, yeah,
years. Yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah. That's the basic way of getting things out of a plant, is either with alcohol, ethanol, or by water or steam, right? And that's how you get essential oils or teas.
Exactly.
So I think that was just a really good insight into some of the adulteration. Let's just walk somebody through the process of okay, you and I are going to sit down and we're going to formulate this product. We've got the product approved. You get an NPN for the product, which is a natural product number from Health Canada and Canada. In FDA, I think the process is a little bit different. It's not as stringent, but nevertheless, we order the product. Take us through from getting the raw material to the bottle that's sitting on the customer shelf in the customer's house and on the store shelves in terms of the testing that goes through at every point.
Yeah, absolutely. And through the years, the testing keeps piling up of what we have to watch out for. But just a quick snapshot of what we're testing for, right? And how many times we're testing.
Exactly.
So, once again, the relationship with the manufacturer themselves. So every piece of testing that I'm going to mention, we make sure that the vendor's testing it, we're testing it, and then we're testing it again before the finished product even hits the market. So an example is, before I talked about identity. Identity testing is important with a lot of botanicals because, a lot of these botanicals aren't coming from scientists, they're coming from farmers. And over time, a species can look very close to another species. And so, and back to like the whole rhodiola rosea versus rhodiola crenulata, over time, you may not, a supplier may not realize that a species is being replaced with a different species. And so in order to make sure that the finished product always stays the same, we're testing for identity at the vendor level, at the raw material level before it goes into the product, and then if possible, at the finished product level. And so in addition to identification, there's standardization, which we call an assay, which basically measures the potency of an active ingredient within the product. So an example being that milk thistle again, with silymarin, which is the active within milk thistle. So we, so the difference between a standardized material versus an extract ratio, and what I like to say is the biggest difference is that standardizations can be tested. Extract ratios cannot be tested. So if you see an ashwagandha that's standardized to 10-1, that product can't be tested for, because you can't test for an extract ratio, because the closest test to that is an identity, which is going to pass because it's still ashwagandha.
Right. It's just concentration is
go
different, right? A 10-1 is a more potent concentration.
Exactly. And because of that, you really care about the standardization, and a higher extract ratio can yield a higher standardization of actives within the product. But what you can really test for are those actives. And so just getting back on course, after identity, we test for the active ingredients, which is the standardization. And then after that, it's really about safety, right? So after that, we start testing for heavy metals to make sure there's no, lead or arsenic contamination. We test for micros, which is basically the microbiology, to make sure there's nothing there. There's no yeast and mold, and there's no E. coli or salmonella, no type of contamination that could possibly get someone sick after they consume the product. Which, as a side note, there's way more testing for contaminants in the natural health product section than even for food that you find on a store shelves. That's why you see so many more recalls for vegetables on a store shelf, as opposed to natural health products and dietary supplements. And then besides that, we're testing for solvents. So we make sure that the solvent residuals are not over safe levels. So like I was saying, the ethanols and the hexanes, making sure there's not too much left over. And then we also test for pesticides to make sure that if something's not organic, that it's not reaching over any pesticide limits that would be acceptable within Canada and the United States.
Right. And does that include herbicides as well? Because I know Roundup is a big thing. Glyphosate is a huge concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, it includes that as well. And I know I've seen even a lot of brands actually showing it's free of glyphosate.
Yes,
Which,
that's right.
that's one of the new claims that are coming out. Without just saying herbicides or pesticides, they're using that one in particular because it's such a sticking point.
It is a big sticking point. So it seems like at the beginning, to summarize, you're making sure the product is what it is and there's nothing extra in it. And there's some very high-tech specific testing that you do right away as soon as it arrives in the facility. Then you make sure that the active ingredients and the active components that are part of that herb or other substance are actually present. It could be actually a problem if it's too high or too low, because then you get into toxicity. So the front end is making sure it is what it is, and is it going to be of therapeutic quality? And then the back end is more of, okay, let's make sure that it actually doesn't have anything that's harmful, because a lot of plants do suck up a lot of these minerals and toxins. Like, for example, rice. We've heard of the whole rice and arsenic thing. A lot of plants are chelators. They'll actually pull minerals, substances out of the ground. That's actually one of the beauties of the plant world, is that they help kind of recycle some of these toxic substances, right? So those are the two testing. And then the last thing that I just wanted to just briefly touch on is the final product and the amount that is actually on the label. Is it actually in the capsule? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's where one of the big differences come into play between Health Canada and the FDA. And it comes into the fact that in Canada, we're required to have what's on the label actually be what's in the product. And it's a matter of having to test every batch of product that comes out of our building is tested for actives. And so in that process, we're able to make sure that everything, because just a side note, a lot of companies throughout North America, when they bring things to market, what they are actually putting on their certificate of analysis is the input of the ingredient. So
that's right. That's what the manufacturer sends to the company, right?
Exactly. So when there's an input, that means that, okay, we needed a milligram of B12. We put into this product through blending, physically, we put 1 milligram of B12 into this product, but they aren't testing it after the fact. So, they aren't testing if there was something in the materials that it was mixed with, or it was stored in a way that was going to degrade the B12. And so because of that, we test that content after it comes out of production. And then we put it into stability, which is basically us putting it into a stability chamber to test it for over a year, 2 years, 3 years, and see how long that product is stable for, so that what you're getting in that bottle when you buy it, we guarantee what's inside of it because we have tested it after production, and we have put it into stability so that we have the stability data to show that all those actives inside of there are actually still good until the expiration date on that bottle.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important point to look at, because you want to make sure as a customer, as a clinician, that whatever's inside of your supplement is going to be there and good and therapeutic to the end of that expiry date, not just when it was manufactured and then half of it's gone. And that's a recurrent story I hear all the time, where it's like, a substance was there at the beginning, but then, over time, vitamin D degrades. And I've noticed that a patient supplements with one vitamin D and then their levels don't go up. And then they only go up if they switch to a different form. And you're like, well, it's supposed to all be vitamin D. Not all supplements are created equal. I can't stress that enough. And I see that a lot with my patients.
Yeah.
Right?
And specific examples are like, vitamins. A lot of vitamins have stability concerns, but also one of the biggest growing parts of our industry, which are probiotics, where probiotics, in the past, I've done a test of going to stores and buying different probiotics that are on the shelf and setting them out to see how many probiotics are left in those products. And it is so incredibly concerning when I get those results back and barely anything is passing or even alive, with a lot of them showing non-existent. So it's a matter of, over time, really stability data on probiotic products are so important, because those are living organisms and they are going to die over time. And so it is really a matter of making sure the correct overage is put into the product so that by the time the expiration comes, you have a viable amount of probiotics left that meet your label claim. So I really think, as far as stability is concerned, probiotics are where the industry can improve the most. And even though probiotics are kind of one of the more recent parts of our industry, as opposed to vitamins and minerals that have been around a very long time.
But they happen to be also the most popular part of our industry, right? Like every company almost has a probiotic, and there's a huge discrepancy in price usually with a lot of these probiotics. Mm-hmm. And some of the non-medicinal ingredients. Sometimes I always talk about this with patients, is that they want the cleanest product. I want it to be gluten-free. I want it to be starch-free. I want it to be everything free other than just the vitamin D or the probiotic that's in it. And that's just, the reality is that simply just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work, because there are ingredients that are needed to maintain the stability of a substance. Like, for example, something like sucrose. Well, it's a simple sugar. It's a disaccharide, but that is necessary to maintain the stability for vitamin D. And a lot of people look at it and say, like, why the heck is there sucrose in my vitamin D? And then they realize, if they look for one that's sucrose free, you can get one that's sucrose free, but the vitamin D probably is going to be degraded by the time that you are consuming it.
Exactly. So, a product that's efficacious and a product that's clean, even though both are important, they don't mean the exact same thing.
That's right.
So sometimes, you have to make a choice between, do you want a product that's, would be considered more clean, or do you want a product that's more efficacious? And unfortunately, sometimes, our level of development as an industry is getting better, but sometimes we have to make that choice between if it's clean or if it's efficacious. And in the perfect scenarios, we do get products that are both clean and efficacious at the same time.
That's right. But that doesn't happen every single time, right? I think that's what everyone say, well, let's make that. Well, I think that's what everyone's working towards. But the reality is that many cases, we're still not quite there. And you mentioned something like overage. For those people that have never heard of that, that's a very standard practice in manufacturing probiotics, is that if, let's say, there's 10 billion in a capsule, well, you'll actually put in 20 billion or 50 billion at the beginning, because the rate of degradation. So there's going to be, let's say 20 billion at the beginning, but by the end or the midpoint of that life cycle of the expiration of that product, you're still going to get that label claim. So there are ways of trying to adjust for those things, and probiotics has done overages, but in general, we have to understand that there are many factors that go into making a really high quality, therapeutic, and safe product. I think we talked a lot about that today. Is there anything that we missed today? Because I know we covered a lot of extremely valuable information, but is there anything else that you would want to share with our listeners about product quality in general that we maybe didn't touch on before we close?
I think it really comes down to not being afraid to talk to the brand. So if you have a question about the product, where something comes from or what form it's in, all the brands that are upstanding, they're willing to talk to you. They have the ability to chat on their websites or a phone number you can call to ask questions, and they're willing to talk to you. And you know what? If you are looking at a product and you can't get through to that brand, or you can't see a clear route of communication to them, don't trust them. You know, the brands that are good, the brands that care, they will talk to you and they'll give you the information you're looking for.
Right. And I would also add that, the types of experts, healthcare professionals, doctors that are part of the teams and brands, at least I know that goes a long way for me when I'm picking my products for my patients, being able to trust not only the research, but also the education and the team that goes behind the products, because a really good quality professional would not want to associate themselves with a brand that is, not good quality. And then finally, and this is just the most common sense, is you get what you pay for. And there's, we've heard it said there's no free meals, and the natural health product industry is exactly the same. If you're getting a really, really cheap price on an ingredient, I would be very suspicious about that, because there's a reason why it's so suspicious, and there's probably a corner that's being cut, and it may not be in your best interest from a health perspective.
Exactly. There's always a reason why the price is different.
Right. Todd, thank you so much. This has been so insightful. I'm sure we'll have you back on the show again. There's a lot that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, but I know our listeners got a lot today about what goes into a product, what kind of testing is important, what are the things that they should be looking for. We touched on some common adulterations and what companies like AOR are doing to make sure that their products surpass even Health Canada and FDA standards. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. This was a little bit of a longer episode than usual, but I appreciate your patience. I know that you found it as engaging as I did. We just couldn't stop it. We are obviously going to hopefully have Todd back to talk more about these types of topics. And thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Thank you for listening today. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcasts. Do you have a topic that you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic, or email us at marketing@aor.ca. We hope you tune in again next week to learn more about supplementing your health.